Okay. Thank you. And I thank everyone who sent these questions. Um, so the first one, Matthew, I am curious about what happens to personal preferences after awakening. Now that you are almost 7 years stably in it, do you ever get a real hankering for favorite foods? Do you eat sweets? Do you watch any TV or movies? Do you have distinct genre preferences? Do you follow any sports teams? And if so, can you get all worked up in a close game? Or is there an indifferent, perhaps amused neutrality to all things?
Both can be true. So, with regard to preferences, it's an interesting question. I would say um, the real question is whose preferences are they? I enjoy good food, drink, sweets, all of those things, movies too, everything. Everything you mentioned, I enjoy. Emily and I are currently watching the entire Doctor Who television series. So I've never been a sports fan, but I got pretty worked up over the Argentina France game in the World Cup. If anybody saw it, it was incredible. Amazing game, just unbelievable. Probably the best soccer game in history. Um, so, yeah, it can be enjoyable to get involved in these things and the kind of drama that they present. Um, sure, that neutrality or indifference that you speak of is sort of always there. But liberation doesn't mean you can't enjoy a close game or a good story. And I don't see, what would be the fun in that. So, um, but it does give you a larger perspective. And that larger perspective changes things. So, preferences relate to the body and the mind, not the underlying reality. Because I know that reality, my experience of the preferences and any transitory excitement or things is is somewhat different. Um, Preferences are not they're not real attributes. They're malleable and fluid. They're impermanent and ever changing, like the weather, for example. So I can enjoy them, but I don't really identify with them. They're not mine, really, if that makes sense. Nothing is mine,
So
not
you're
even
not,
the body mind, for example, let alone its preferences.
so there's not attachment to what
Yeah,
you prefer in the moment.
yeah, yeah. You know, there's when you get excited about something or enjoy something, ordinarily you're experiencing that through this kind of subject object duality. I am enjoying it. I am excited about this game. I want France to win, you know? But if you remove this subject object duality, if you remove the dividing line, then the experience is different. And the attachment to the preferences or the excitement or whatever it is are seen from a larger perspective or from a larger vantage point. So you're not as, I guess, liable to be completely carried away by emotions or things like that. But you can still, of course, you still experience them, you still can enjoy them. Another way to think about it is look, awakening is meant to liberate you from suffering, not from enjoyment. You know, I'm enjoying myself more than ever. these days. So, um, yeah.
Any follow-up questions?
Yeah, my hand is raised, but you can't see it, so I'm just speaking up here, and I'm the only one. So,
Okay,
um,
go for it.
so this is one of those places where words don't exactly work right. You know, to say I prefer something, it's it's a little confusing to understand that there could be a preference, a preference, without someone preferring it. More to the point, if I prefer something and I don't get it, um, it seems like it would create some suffering. It may not be a lot. Like if there's no cream with my coffee, I'd prefer that there were, but I'm not going to be um, that upset about it, or maybe upset at all. But in principle, if the preference was strong enough, it would be something that would create suffering. Or like, well, but no, but I really prefer that. I wanted something to happen that didn't happen. So I know you, Matt, you talked about taking the eye out, but I don't really, this almost is the whole thing right here in a certain kind of way. I've thought
That's
of this a
always
lot before. You know what I
that's
mean? Like,
always the case. Anywhere you begin, if you start to talk about this, you get to the point where you're like, yeah, this is the whole thing right here.
right. So, and with that, yeah.
Well,
So you said you
everything's
you
the
you experience
same.
a larger perspective,
Yeah.
right? In order, it seems like what you were saying is, I don't get upset when I don't get my preferences met. That was what I took from what you were saying. But
But look, the being upset is also just another experience or emotion or a kind of excitement to the body or the mind. No one owns that either.
uh, okay, that's great.
This is the
That's
same as
great.
I'm trying to say all the time about folding everything in. See, so it's like the thing that stuck out there where you're like, but if this happened, then and it was bad enough, then you would be upset or you would experience pain or anguish or whatever. Sure, but who owns that? Find the find the viewpoint in which you can never be wrong, in which you can never be thrown off. You can never see. This is the thing. People think that awakening is a kind of state, a mind state, or a body state, or some kind of state. But if it were a state, or if it were rooted in an experience, or a state of mind, or a state of the body, then it wouldn't really be what it's purported to be. It wouldn't be eternal, for example. It wouldn't be unchanging, diamond like, perfect. Because all states, all body states, all mind states come and go. They're all impermanent. So just see your preferences as that, impermanence, feelings arising and dissipating. The more clearly you can see that, the better, the easier it is to let go of them. And the easier it is to let go of them, that just calms everything down. And your the agitation that you might experience naturally just becomes less and less. Not that if you did experience agitation, it would trouble you. It wouldn't. Does that make sense?
It's a great answer. So, but is it?
Mark, there's another guy with a
Yeah,
hand
yeah,
up.
go. That's fine.
Yeah.
That's great. Good answer, Matt.
Paul,
Thank you.
Paul. Nope, you're muted, Paul.
Yeah, I just thought. Uh, so the last question, or the original question, has to do with your preferences, Matt, and your experience. And no sooner does a question about your preferences arise when I'm thinking, what about the experience, not just of preferences, but of time? And I'm remembering a line, I think, in one of your books where, if I'm recalling correctly, I think you said you no longer experience it.
Yeah, I would question whether anybody does.
Uh,
Yeah, you know, if you look for it, um, tell me when you find it.
yeah.
Try to experience time directly. Uh, you know, you can't find anything.
Follow up then.
Yeah.
Was there a difference pre, post awakening with regard to how you looked at time?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. We tend to have um, a subtle or not so subtle idea of what time is, a concept of what it is and how it works. And generally, it's that idea or that concept that we experience because it's foremost in our minds. And whenever we reflect on the passage of time, it's through the lens of that idea or that concept. We're not actually experiencing time directly. We're experiencing an idea of time, a concept of time. And that was how I experienced it also. You know, I had an idea of what time was based on conditioning. And that's how I experienced time and what I thought it was. You know, it could be very precise or it could just be a vague idea in the back of your head, but that's what you're experiencing. The direct experience of time, I challenge anyone to experience it. It's not, it's even, you know, even according to modern physics, it's not what we think it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That was a 3-minute answer, Matthew.
What does that mean? Is it, oh, is it time to time? I'm like, what? Am I going too, is it too long or too short?
It just took time.
Fair enough.
Uh,
Fair enough.
okay, the next question is the longest written question, and it's really interesting. The universe appears to be an astounding process of differentiation. It appears in its fundamental nature to want to create an infinite and endless panoply of selves. And yet, the teaching is to label selfing as delusion and no selfing as truth. For your family and friends, I imagine they would say that the most interesting and endearing thing about you is that you are Matthew Lowe's, not that you are universal consciousness, as they would probably also want you to feel about them. Each of the millions of species of plant and animal, even each individual therein, seems much more interesting to me in its individuality, and yes, even in its otherness, than in the realization it is an appearance arising in consciousness or infusing its unique distinguishing characteristics into a vast oneness. I guess this may be an issue of the one and the many. Is it possible to be fully engaged and intrigued by both simultaneously?
Ultimately, they're not really separate. So, yes, it's possible. But you have to see both. If you only see multiplicity but don't really see oneness, then you're not seeing both. And it's not the universe itself that differentiates. It's the mind that has this nature of wanting to create separate selves and objects. And the search for the truth is not really about what the mind wants, but rather what is the nature of the mind and what is true beyond the mind. And of course, individuals are interesting and endearing. I would never argue that point, but they're also fundamentally undifferentiated consciousness. So as the question says, it's sort of an issue of the many and the one. The many appear in the one, and the one appear in the many. And that's also quite interesting and quite wonderful too, because it opens the door to kindness, love, compassion for all, even those individuals who may not be so endearing for one reason or another. And I'm not saying that forms are not interesting or beautiful. Just see that the forms are mind created and recognize the emptiness beyond the mind. That's all. There's no need to abolish forms. As I'm sure you've heard, both form and emptiness are one, or form is emptiness and emptiness is form. It's a common saying from the Heart Sutra.
Looks like everyone totally understands that.
I figured they would. Yeah.
Anyone want to raise your hand? It is the most, for me, the complicated experience to not see myself and everything as particular.
That's, if I can just speak to my own experience, at least for me, that the experience of recognizing that all-encompassing oneness changed everything, changed the way I saw things. So that's why I say, yeah, it's possible, but you have to really see this oneness first. You're not just thinking about it or speculating on it. To be, I can see how that might not be very interesting past a certain point. I mean, how much can you say or think about all-encompassing oneness? At the best, it's a singular idea. But what I'm saying is it's not an idea. And when it's not an idea, its interestingness and its wonderfulness become immediately apparent.
All right, we're going to go to question number 3, and there's a 3A and 3B, so I'll just start with 3A. When you are in the state of open awareness, what is the difference between that knowing presence and thinking? What are you aware of, and does that awareness become thoughts with words?
So there's kind of two different ways I'm answering this question, because I wasn't entirely sure what the questioner meant with their terminology. On the one hand, we can talk about open awareness as a meditation practice. And on the other hand, maybe they were asking a question about awakened consciousness with this phrase, knowing presence. So I'll answer both. The words don't matter all that much. So as a meditation practice, open awareness is not dependent on thinking, but thoughts can appear within it. So whether and what thoughts appear or don't appear in this open awareness meditation isn't really relevant. Just being aware without grasping or resistance to whatever appears or doesn't appear is at the heart of that practice. If thoughts and words come, they come. Don't grasp at or resist them. Just be aware. If the question is more about the nature of awakened consciousness or that knowing presence, as the question refers to, that's not a thought at all. It's beyond thoughts, words, and concepts. And here, you're not aware of anything in particular. It's just pure awareness without subjects or objects. It's beyond all things. So thoughts and words are only mental formulations. And it's beyond the mind, beyond all mental formulations. So that's why when people realize it, it's so ineffable. It's a bit baffling even. You can't wrap your mind around it. We could say perhaps one is aware of that which is aware. But even that's going too far because really, it's a circle. Who is aware of it then? The whole subject-object paradigm has to be transcended to know this knowing presence.
Let me read the second one because it's very linked to it. By all accounts, the experience of awakening is ineffable, as you just said, wordless, non-cognitive. But in stepping back to talk about it, we must use the language of our given culture. It seems that with reality, truth, absolute, etc., we are using descriptive and explanatory terms that arose in Hindu, Buddhist, or Judeo-Christian cultures of long ago. There is something very otherworldly in those cultural perspectives, a fundamental distaste for the body and earth, wanting to escape entirely from the wheel of rebirth, or to spend eternity in incorporeal heaven. Even the notion of pure awareness, untouched by body, mind, and world, can smack of a yearning for immaculate transcendence. One thing I love about your teaching is that you are really trying to use your own words, and yet when push comes to shove, you seem to cite back to the absolutist descriptive terms that arose in those prior cultures. I wonder, for example, how a non-colonized indigenous person might choose to describe the experience, which makes me also wonder whether the actual experience of enlightenment is subtly shaped by the culture of the experiencer, or whether it stands free of that. Reality is reality, after all, as I believe you say.
I do say that. Yeah, this is a very, very interesting question, and it's a long one. Of course, I'm speaking both from my experience, but I'm also speaking in a particular language and using particular words that come from a particular culture and have influence from several different major cultures, as the question points out. So that, of course, plays into what I'm saying. There are only so many words to refer to something that's absolute or one or non-dual. My solution has been to try to employ them all here and there so that it's clear that the words or the word doesn't matter. What matters is the actuality, the reality. That's what matters, not the word, the particular word that we happen to have for it. So in my writing, for example, I will refer to, Brahman, will refer to Dharmakaya, will refer to Tao or God, or the absolute or the supreme or non-duality, or all of these things are different ways of trying to angle and point toward this absolute. It's helpful to use these terms that have been passed down in some regard because they've been around for a long time, and we could presume that perhaps they've been around for a long time because they're useful in pointing toward or to investigating these profound, ineffable truths. And, indigenous people from other cultures have described these truths and experiences too, using their own words and concepts. I'm not an anthropologist, so I can't speak to it in great depth. But, if you for example, in my third book, which is really written about this question of words, one of the examples I cite is from Algonquin, I think, which has this idea of the spirit and the great spirit. The spirit as in the individual, and the great spirit as the sort of overarching truth. Well, this is very similar to like Atman and Paramatman that you find in the Hindu tradition, for example. And you see this pattern of small self and big self over and over and over in different traditions. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, you have the soul and God. And it just over and over, you have the same basic patterns. Yes, the words may be slightly different. Yes, the concepts may be slightly different, but where they're pointing, I would say, is the same. Because the nature of the absolute is that it's absolute, whatever name you give it. And in fact, all multiplicity, all experiences, and all ideas spring from that. In other words, it's the reality in which the diversity of people's minds and cultures and languages appear. Not the other way around. And if you get the sense of this absolute oneness that's changeless and eternal, then it can't really be otherwise. If we imagine it some other way, it's only because we haven't gone far enough in our inquiry. But if you go far enough, there has to be this one reality. It's kind of like the universe. The universe means one. But now people speak of the multiverse. Well, what is that? It just means that what we thought was the universe wasn't really everything. So we try to think about the universe as an object. But if it's really one, then it can't be an object because there's nothing outside of it. It's reality itself. And then the other thing I would say is about the perceived distaste for the body and the earth in some traditions. I would say that this is due to various misunderstandings and incomplete knowledge. And just as an example, in Advaita Vedanta, it's said that the world is Brahman, the supreme reality. And in Buddhism, it is said that emptiness is form. And in Christianity, Christ takes bread and says, "This is my body." And he also says, "The kingdom of heaven is spread upon the earth." So these teachings are that are at the very heart of these great traditions. I would say do not exhibit a distaste for the body and the earth, but rather a deep reverence for their profound significance. But the traditions and history is vast, and people have all kinds of different ideas. And you can see different. I would say some of this just comes from incomplete knowledge.
Thank you, Matthew. Anybody want to raise a hand for this one? David.
Matthew, so in the process of your experience in seeing situations, people, things that you ultimately have to transcribe into an essence of oneness, that process of something comes in, you experience it, then you go, this is really oneness, and you keep doing that. Can you share a bit more about some of your experiences with that, or some of your struggles? And I guess once you're awakened, you don't really have to struggle with that.
Yeah. I wouldn't describe it as a transcription. I'm not walking around thinking about this stuff. I'm not, after my awakening, in the preceding, in the immediate aftermath, I literally walked around looking at everything,
right?
Confirming, yes, I am that, I am that, I am that. Seeing that everything I looked at was nothing but my own being. But and that's a marvel indeed. But once confirmed, I don't need to walk around every day and think to myself or translate objects into oneness. They are oneness. It's just clearly seen.
That makes very good sense.
And, whenever I look for it, there it is. So, it's not a cognitive process.
I guess I was originally wondering when you had just awakened, the process of going through that initially, which you've explained, and then once you see that you're in everything, then you can just allow it to be, because that's all there is anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of, in some ways I described it as all things being equal again, you just go about your business. And of course, in writing some of this down and speaking with people, I am attempting to articulate it, but that's another matter. That's just trying to articulate and to help others see it for themselves.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In the interest of time, I'm going to keep us moving. We've got a lot more questions here. All right. This from one of my dear friends. You state in your book, all problems are self-generated. There is no exception. In light of all the suffering in the world, this is hard to understand. Can you please provide further context to this statement? How is this relevant to children born in poverty, in war zones, or in horribly abusive homes? Can you also talk about blame and personal responsibility for self-suffering of addiction or other troubling behaviors, and how people respond to this with care, unconditional love for others?
Yeah, this is a good one to give context to. So here's one way to look at it. Problems aren't necessarily like our fault. I think when people hear all problems are self-created, they immediately hear, oh, so it's my fault. But even though it's maybe not our fault, we are intertwined with the situations from which the problems arise. And the ego self grasps on to various forms of suffering and incorporates it into its own view of itself. So, for example, we could experience a trauma in just a second, but the effects of that could last a whole lifetime. Why? Because they're interwoven into the very structures that make up the ego self, the mind, and the body. So it's this very entanglement that's both the individual self and the problems that we experience. And that's kind of why I say all problems are self-created. You could say they're one and the same, really. And another sort of way to look at this from yet another angle is to say that the self-generation of problems relates to all selves, all individual selves. In other words, problems always start with some ego self. If not your own, then somebody else's. Because the ego selves are at variance with the truth, they always lead to suffering, and not just for that person, but for others too. So, for example, greed, hatred, paranoia, desire, and anger of many different ego selves generates much suffering that leads to things like poverty, war, and abuse, and so on. So there is this larger picture as well. About personal problems or troubling behavior, there's really no need to assign blame for any situation. The causes are multitudinous, infinite, really. And the situation is as it is. There's nobody to blame. And all we can do is kind of work with the situations by offering what help we can with unconditional love and with acceptance. And when necessary, by drawing clear boundaries. We have to have compassion for the person, but also for ourselves too. And certainly those kinds of situations are never easy. So.
Follow-up questions for this? Mark.
Yeah, I'll make this fast. It's actually something, Matt, you said to me once a long time ago, and it really went to the heart of this same issue I had with the person who asked the question. And so I'm going to ask you to just say more about it or just clarify it again because it was so helpful for me. I brought up with you a while ago that how is it that anyone can say it's all perfect the way it is? When clearly there are so many things that are wrong by any way we would determine what's right or wrong. And your response was essentially, and I want you to say more about this, but what you said basically was, I'm not saying these things are good. It's just perfect because things happen as a result, a natural result of all the things, the multitudinous things you just said. And that's why it's perfect. It could be no other way. I'm sure I'm leaving some stuff out, but that answer that you provided for me was really helpful because I really snag on the whole world suffering thing too.
Yeah, I don't know what more to add to that. It is perfect, but only when taken as a whole. When you don't draw any limit, then it's perfect. Then it's all-encompassing love. I think in one of my books, and I think we've had this conversation too, Mark, I talk about what I call big compassion. It's not personal compassion. It's the compassion that is embodied in the universe itself, in reality itself. It's that kind of compassion that is bigger than all of us. We can't, it doesn't live in us, we live in it. And in some ways, when we struggle with these things, one of the things that you can do is have trust in this big compassion, in the perfection and the love that's everything, all taken as a whole. And that ultimately everything works out. Ultimately, nothing can really go wrong. And that all our suffering is, in one way or another, leading us to a wonderful, peaceful truth. As hard as it is at times,
Dennis.
Matt, on this subject, as you are well aware, I've struggled with the evil in the world and all of the pain and suffering that you see and feel yourself, of course. But what I fall back on is that just the fact that we exist proves that the universe or that God or the ultimate oneness, however you want to phrase it, is benevolent. And therefore, as the creator, even though we may not be able to see it or understand it at times in our lives, we have to know that everything, all of that oneness, is indeed benevolent. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, this speaks to what I was saying earlier about the profound significance of the body and the earth, about our existence here. And yeah, I would agree with that. It's maybe hard to see at times, especially if we're going through trouble. But when taken as a whole, the experience that we're having is like a miracle.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Question number 5 from another dearest friend. I relate closely to Taoism and practice Qigong. The Tao seems equivalent with non-duality. The Tao begins with one and becomes two, moving to duality. Consciousness, Shen, moves into form, body, and returns to Shen at death. The Qigong practice is to cleanse Qi, stay awake, and elevate awareness and consciousness, Shen, particularly at death. And then a little Qigong life cycle diagram was attached for your review also. Please comment on this.
I like this. Please comment. Yeah. This model was new to me, but it's a good teaching model, used as an aid for practice, clearly. My comment would be is that although the model is what it is, the eternal Tao is never really absent. the mind and body and all dualistic phenomena appear within that. So consciousness moving into form is just consciousness taking on limitations, forgetting its limitless perfection, and identifying with a particular mind, body, and various things and events. So to cleanse ki is really to remove these various limitations, to dissolve obstacles or blockages, and to see through the things one has identified with. And that this alone elevates consciousness by simply revealing the original state, that eternal Tao. And of course, at death is a good opportunity for clarification, but there's no reason to wait. So yeah, keep practicing to clarify the mind and the body and the world.
Any follow-up questions? I like that answer. March 24th, we're all awakening. Remember that, friends. Okay, I'll go to the next question. Okay, so Matt and I talked today, and there's the first question is just really a yes or no, and then there's 3 questions. So would you be willing to record some guided meditations that we could use in our practice?
Yes, I just don't know when it will happen, so be patient. I'm pretty sure the next book that I write will be specifically on meditation, so it would be a good part of that work. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll be patient, but remember, for us unawakened beings, patience is not always easy.
By all means, Bruce, don't wait for the guided meditation.
Good advice. And the next 3 questions sort of all were submitted and could lead to a meditation, a guided meditation, but can also just be answered. So we'll go through all 3 of these. Most religious practices emphasize the importance of letting go. What do we need to let go of? Since you will likely say everything, can you categorize or group what we let go of? Is this a step-by-step process? Can you provide a short guide to letting go practice? When we let go, where does it go, and how do we prevent it from coming back?
I like this question. Yeah, everything. Yeah, we could break it down into 3 major categories: the mind, the body, and the world. And you could break those down. For example, you could break the mind into thoughts, emotions, and sensations. You could break the body down into its various systems and tissues, the digestive system, the circulation system, and so on, the nervous system. We could break the world into time, space, objects, and events, and so on. It begins as a step-by-step process, and that's the course of practice, of course. But at some point, it becomes more like an avalanche. And the purpose of practice is really to set this avalanche in motion. The quintessential letting go practice in meditation is dropping thoughts or letting go of thoughts. And there's 4 different ways we go about it. The first is by focusing on an object. So when we're doing focusing meditation, when thoughts intrude, what do? We return our attention back to the object of meditation. That facilitates letting go of the thoughts, but it's a bit artificial. So next, we work on just observing our thoughts. So we see how they arise, the course they take, and how they fall away on their own. So here we don't even have to do anything, just be patient, and they will, as they say, self-liberate. They will fall away on their own. And so we're observing that. Next, we actively drop them sooner and sooner, even as they start to bubble up. So they don't even have a chance to run their course. And finally, we learn to let go of the mind itself altogether. As far as where things go when you let go of them, they don't necessarily go anywhere. But you're no longer grasping or resisting at their coming and going, and you no longer identify with them. Yeah.
So if they come back, you really haven't really let go then?
Only if they trouble you. I mean, yeah, your body still appears, your mind still appears, but whose is it? Is it a problem? If it's a problem, then it's a problem. But if it's not, then you have no worries. Yeah, here's another, that's actually, here's another letting go practice. Imagine you're going to die in 10 minutes. It's not going to be painful, but it's going to happen with absolute certainty. Assuming you spend a few minutes saying goodbye to loved ones, in the remaining time, your only job is to let go of yourself and this world. Your memories, your undone tasks, your unfulfilled dreams, your regrets, your possessions, your incomplete bucket list, your lingering hopes, your unresolved conflicts, your knowledge, your accomplishments, and those very same loved ones, everything. And that's a good letting go practice. That's just a kind of thought meditation.
I'm going to read the next one because it's also related to letting go. We tend to identify with our mind and our body, though we are not our mind and our body. Would you please guide us with practical suggestions on how we can let go of this identification in contemplation, meditation, and everyday life without being overcome by our worry and fear of being lost in emptiness?
Yeah. Well, we already talked about the meditation, letting go. In contemplation, I would say, the first thing is we have to cultivate a desire to let go of strongly held ideas. We have to want to let go of ourselves and our view. And then we have to give ourselves permission to discover for ourselves what's real and unreal. And finally, we have to do the investigation of how we came to be identified with the mind and body in the first place, how the cycle of identification renews itself, and how we came to believe in our various ideas about who we are and what we're doing and what we're experiencing, and so on. As for everyday life, I would say it sounds funny, but try not to take your life so personally. Of course, do your best, but let go of any attachment to particular outcomes. So on the one hand, we can stop sort of blaming ourselves for things in our life. And on the other hand, we can stop congratulating ourselves too. Just see life, the coming and going of waking and sleeping, the ebb and flow of the mind, various actions, and the changing nature of the body and mind in a very simple way, without grasping or resistance to all of its ups and downs and arounds. And to sort of negotiate that fear of emptiness, of being nothing, of not being your body or not being your mind. You have to be able to try to become familiar with this emptiness gradually. If you just slam yourself into it, it's very abrupt. But if in your meditation you gradually approach this emptiness and sort of go into it a little bit, piece by piece, and when the fear arises, breathe, relax, observe, watch what's happening, and see that it's not the terrible thing that you feared. It's just emptiness. And that bit, by becoming more familiar with it, less fear will arise. And remember, too, that whatever is the case with regard to your being, it is already the case now. So there's really nothing to be afraid of here. It's just a process to let go of that fear.
Thank you for that question. And any hands want to go up? Mark.
Just a short one. In the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, I've run across more and more teachers that are incorporating into their meditation recommendations to, instead of doing longer sits, to do frequent short ones. I've heard a lot of different names for these kind of things, but basically, I know Joel has like a 1 minute breath meditation, and other people have these, like take a holiday or just drop into it just for a moment and do. And I thought you might have something to say about that. It seems to have some merit.
Yeah, it definitely does, especially if it's done with regularity. That's the, as I always say, consistency is magic. That's the magic. I was a slow learner on this too. But when I finally started doing some practices with consistency, you start to see why that consistency really is what is very powerful in both in being able to see contrast and actual changes to identification and to your mind and to your body too. Yeah, regularity, I think, and consistency does matter. Of course, the usual recommendation is daily meditation, but twice a day is good. 3 times a day is good. Certainly better than doing like 1 hour once a week.
Larry.
So, Matthew, I'd like to go back to the previous question. It sounds like you're making an assumption that emptiness and that whole thing is scary. And is that accurate? Is that an accurate assumption?
It's not an assumption. I don't think it's scary, but certainly some people who experience the emptiness of self have an experience of being frightened or of fear. It was my case, actually, when I was in my 20s, I had a kind of experience of emptiness that terrified me because I thought I was losing my mind. You know, we get caught in between where we see the emptiness, but we're still clinging to the self. And because of that, it can be frightening. But it's not inherently frightening. No, it's quite wonderful, I would say.
All right. I'm going to read the next one. And again, it's overlaps a little bit with these other discussions. When practicing spiritual inquiry, you say, don't assume anything. Only believe what you know is absolutely true, with no assumptions to lead you to truth. You also say, if it is a thought, it is not true. I assume then that absolute truth is something like the silence of pure awareness. Can you talk about this and maybe offer an approach to effective inquiry?
Yeah. The silence of pure awareness is as good a term as any. When speaking of the absolute truth, we could maybe talk a little bit about how this truth does not require proofs or an argument or imagination or reasoning. It's clear, immediate, and self-evident. And if fully realized, it leaves no room for doubts. So knowledge of it is in an entirely different sphere of reality than a mental argument. As far as an approach for effective inquiry, you can really inquire into anything and reach the truth if you follow it all the way to the end. But, traditionally, some questions or particular things have proven quite fruitful. For example, the classic inquiry, and for good reason, is the question, who am I? Or what am I? And other fruitful questions might be, where am I? If you're identified with your mind, you might ask, where is my mind? Or from where does this mind arise? And these kinds of fundamental questions, if taken seriously, quickly put one on a path to effective inquiry. Because it should be quite clear that no constructed answer, derived, reasoned, or imagined by the mind will sufficiently answer such a question. All such answers are unsatisfying if you're honest with yourself. And if you persist with the question despite any sort of cognitive dissonance that arises from the mind's struggle, then you may soon start to experience this emptiness. And if you stay with this emptiness, then you may soon realize the self, or the truth, or this all-encompassing oneness.
Thank you, Matthew. That was a Bruce question, so I liked your answer.
Good.
Any follow-ups to that one?
Yes, please, Bruce.
Kristen, go for it.
Matt, how long should we sit with that kind of questioning? You know, from where does my mind arise?
As long as it takes.
Only till March 24th.
Bruce, it used to be the 14th. I don't know where you for it.
Oh,
You know,
Matthew said it would take 10 days longer for us.
the important thing is when you do an inquiry like this, see right away that you aren't meant to come up with a literal answer. You aren't meant to come up with a articulated concept. You're meant to see directly the origin of your mind. So you're not trying to formulate a mental answer. You're trying to see what is your experience of your mind. So at the beginning, if you're trying to answer it cognitively, it just creates this kind of cognitive dissonance because no answer seems satisfactory. And although, you know, when I was asking myself this question, where is my mind and from where does my mind arise? I do remember looking at the trees and having a thought that my mind was the same as the trees. It came from the same place, that it was no different than anything else. And I think that was I've spoken about these kind of things like what I call a culminating thought. It's a thought that folds everything in. You know, when I talk about that folding in thing, it folds the last thing in. So, you know, for me, that mind was a troublesome one. And then, you know, and that thought gave me a way to, and I want to be clear, it was something that arose spontaneously. You know, when we do these kinds of inquiries, it's not like we're scrabbling to grab hold of the answer. It's almost like we're waiting for illumination. So your question's a tough one. You know, it's just, yeah, as long as it takes, keep delving into the depths of that fundamental question.
All right, Matthew, I'm going to go to the last question. And then if we have time, go backwards.
Okay.
Many of us have deep unconscious psychological remnants from past experience, often in childhood, that lead to internalized feelings of shame, fear, depression, or worry. How do we move beyond the limits these may impose? And do positive internalized feelings pose an equal limitation?
So the limitations can be brought into the light gently but surely and exposed for what they are. In other words, we have to look at them. Have compassion for yourself. In other words, you don't have to do it all at once, but you investigate, you know. let go of what you can and sort of negotiate with what you can't quite let go of yet, but keep bringing it into the light. If you can, in the larger inquiry, find the self that is holding on to these feelings, these internalized feelings, and let go at the root. We could have lots and lots of different internalized feelings. And to some extent, we can start looking at different ones and different ones and different ones, but they could be endless. So also look for the self that is holding on to all of them. Because then you only have to let go of this one. And yes, positive internalized feelings pose equal limitations. They're maybe not as troublesome to the person, but with regards to realizing the truth, it's still a limitation. And all limitations should be examined thoroughly. And that kind of work is never easy, even when the limitations are positive, because what does it mean then? It means, for example, like in my case, it meant letting go of my hopes. And so, that this kind of bringing things into the light means fundamentally facing ourselves, really looking at ourselves, and that can be difficult.
I don't see any hands up. And we're getting close. There were potentially 7 of us, but I think there's only 3 of us on this call now who are going on a silent retreat next week. And I just wonder if, let's see, what did I write? What advice or suggestions might you offer to deepen this experience? And please try to make your recommendations relevant to everyone on this Zoom.
No problem. When practicing silence, if you've never done it, try it. The first thing, of course, is just working on silencing the mouth. But more interesting is to work on silencing the mind, quieting the mind. So work toward abiding in the silence that remains after you've dismissed all your present thoughts. If you have to think, if thoughts intrude and there's no way around it, maybe contemplate the meaning of not only a silent mouth and a silent mind, but also silent eyes, silent ears, silent hands, and a silent heart. Also, I'll say the title of my second book, When You Are Silent, It Speaks, comes from the 40th verse of Yoko Daishi's Song of Realizing the Way, which I first heard in an Alan Watts lecture, so we can bring that full circle. And it goes like this: you cannot take hold of it. You cannot get rid of it. In not being able to get it, you get it. When you are silent, it speaks. When you speak, it is silent. The great gate is wide open and nobody obstructing it.
Beautiful. And that's the kind of quotation I want you all to be sending in so that Matthew can comment on them the next Zoom meeting. we've decided that's what we're going to do, is read those sorts of quotes and have Matthew discuss their deepest meaning. So we're getting toward, well, we're at the end. Again, Matthew, thank you, and thank you all for being here. We're going to, are there any final questions or just closing comments or thoughts? Kristen, are you saying something? Or
Actually, yeah,
yeah.
Bruce, you actually mentioned March 24th a lot, and I'm wondering why, because that's my 50th birthday. Is there something special about that day other than that it's my 50th birthday?
Yes, we're just hoping to all awaken that. If you don't set a date, does it happen?
That's a great day. Join me all.
Great. We're all going to awaken on Christy's birthday. Happy birthday prematurely.
Thank you.
I just would like to say thank you so much, Matthew, for all of your teaching. Amazing help that you're giving us, all of your generosity, kindness, and love. Thank you so much. And I want to remind us all that we can support this wonderful teacher too, which I plan to do on his website. So thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Yeah, much appreciated.
Thanks for that reminder. There is a donation button on his website, which would be a sweet thing for people to gift him.
Not required, but appreciated.
Not even expected, just a kindness. Anything else from anyone? Yes, Carolyn.
Just hold down your space bar.
Oh, thank you. So Matthew, my question is, when you reach consciousness, is it like one step forward, two steps back, where you kind of sample it and then you're back in how you were thinking before and you have to keep working at it to push through? Or how has your personal experience been with this?
Yeah, my experience has been that throughout my life, I caught glimpses of it. And the glimpses were either wonderful or scary or whatever. They could be lots of different things, but I caught glimpses of what I recognize now as this clear seeing. But in those glimpses, it's like, I was still holding on to something. And so my normal life returned. And these glimpses could be just moments, just a brief moment, a minute, 30 seconds, a second. It could be, and normally we dismiss them. We think, oh, that's just, a weird experience I had. So I think, yeah, we do catch glimpses of it and we keep working, toward it. But ultimately, it's like, working toward it is a fabricated story, because it's always here with us. It's never absent. That's the real difficulty, is that we've never been apart from it. And so my experience when I had this awakening in 2016 was that everything changed. it was a complete revolution of my consciousness. It was like, you know, I say somewhat jokingly, but somewhat honestly, I lost my mind. And so I think in the end, it can be quite sudden and sort of all encompassing. But through the course of our lives, I do think we gain glimpses of it. Yeah. And work towards it. And we may catch pieces of it, bits and parts, you know. Some people have insight into no self, non-self, or into emptiness itself, or some people have insight into oneness. They experience an overwhelming sense of oneness. Yeah. Does that answer your question? So it's like, it's another one of those, both are true.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
Teddy.
I just want to say, let's see, change this to the gallery. Wow. I'm just like so moved, Matthew, by what you've shared with us, and the word that's so resonant right now, and all of it is benevolence. And I have a quote that I went searching to share as we end here, that in silence we must wrap much of our lives, for it is too fine for speech, by Emerson.